Welcome back into the GSMC Sports Podcast. Headed into our next segment of the day, we had a couple different reports, both from the Philadelphia Herald as well as a news station from Miami. It was the Miami Herald and the Philadelphia Inquirer, that reported on the potential of Jimmy Butler leaving Miami this offseason. Now, Butler has been with the Heat for the past few seasons and has led them to 2 NBA Finals appearances last year. Obviously, the sort of media love fest for Jimmy Butler in terms of him being, playoff Jimmy, Jimmy Butler, all of that sort of cliche stuff. But it was an incredible run for an 8th-seeded Heat team to be able to make the finals like that and vastly overachieve on expectations. But there has been sort of some grumblings with, specifically if you look at Pat Riley, where he was pretty upset with the team following their playoff exit, and he had some words for Jimmy Butler, who was very loud despite the fact that he was unable to play after that play-in tournament game where he went down at the end of the first quarter against the 76ers. Now, he toughed it out for the rest of that matchup, but was then ruled out for the remainder of the postseason, and the Heat lost in 5 in the first round to the Celtics. And Jimmy was talking a lot during this whole stretch where he was trolling on Instagram, photoshopping his face onto Jaylen Brown, the whole "don't let us get one" quote going back to last year's Eastern Conference Finals. And then he also had an interview during, it was an intermission, I don't know if it was from the first to second period possibly, of Game 3, where he said he was sick of hearing about the Celtics and everything, despite that the Heat just won their playoff game, and the Heat kind of got blown out from that point. And even still, he spoke as well to the media about how if he were healthy, the Celtics and the Knicks would both have been out of the playoffs. So just a lot of commentary from Jimmy Butler, and Pat Riley was frustrated and said, basically, I'm paraphrasing here, but was saying, stop talking so much if you're not going to play. And it seems to be that there is a little bit of tension for the fact that Butler, as incredible as he's been for Miami through this stretch here, there is some amount of annoyance in the fact that he isn't very available ever during the regular season. You go back in this Miami stretch, he's played in 58, 52, 57, 64, and 60 games. And, because of that, for whatever it's worth, hasn't been an all-star these past 2 years. Now, it's cool when Jimmy Butler talks about, well, he doesn't care about all-stars or all-NBA teams or anything along those lines. But at the same time, it is not a sustainable playoff path to consistently, and there are other problems with this Miami Heat's roster construction. Injuries have obviously played a massive part in why the Heat were, and not just Jimmy Butler, but others as well, in terms of why they've been at the bottom of the Eastern Conference standings-wise the past couple years. The same Eastern Conference that everybody has been, dragging all the way throughout this postseason run, that the Heat can't even necessarily find their footing in the regular season to not have to go up against a number 1 seed. And in large part, again, it's because Jimmy Butler and his lack of availability that has led to again, that frustration. But the Philadelphia Inquirer reported on Tuesday that the 76ers would be open to giving Jimmy Butler a max contract extension if he becomes available this offseason. Jimmy Butler has 1 year left on his contract and then a player option that he is very likely going to decline. And it doesn't sound like the Heat up to this point are willing to commit to giving Jimmy Butler that max contract, which let me know in the comment section whether or not you feel the Heat should be giving out this type of money, but it sounds like the 76ers would be willing to do so, and the Miami Herald put out on Wednesday that, quote, 2 other teams have made it known in league circles that they would be willing to trade for Butler and sign him to a max level contract, which is not a surprise, because if you are one of these other teams that feel like you have a chance to sort of maybe, jumpstart your organization a little bit and get some valuable experience for some of your young players, or if you are especially I feel like in some of these small markets where they understand that perfect superstar isn't just going to walk into free agency. It seems like we are possibly past that point in NBA history where these drastic free agency signings are going to happen. Now we'll see it when time comes, and who knows, maybe I'm proved wrong in this upcoming offseason. But I think that, Butler, he is not the perfect superstar, but he is somebody who, from a toughness standpoint, from setting a culture. Now, there are still people and I think that the fact that the Timberwolves have made it to the Western Conference Finals has sort of had some people pushing back on this idea, but Jimmy Butler, for the first handful of years in his career, was seen as a little bit of a locker room cancer, sort of fought his way out of a number of different situations, most notably with Minnesota and Philadelphia just before he came to Miami, and that he didn't necessarily get along with people, but I think that there's definitely some legitimacy to it. That Timberwolves roster, there was no winning culture, and it did take them landing the lottery win, getting Anthony Edwards, who could be a culture setter for them. But this idea of, well, if Towns had won the finals and been a significant part of that, Andrew Wiggins, who Butler was very critical of, if he was a massive part of the Warriors championship, if that were to sort of come around, listen, that's just an online narrative. I don't think it's worth fully diving into. Jimmy Butler, I do think, has been pretty accurate in terms of a lot of his statements, in terms of the idea of this winning culture, but I do think that he also sort of has his own problems, and we have seen that the injuries and sort of the lack of motivation for the regular season has come to hurt them to some degree. And as a result, this Heat team, where do they feel like they can go from here in terms of, is there a chance they can make another run to the finals? Now, they played the Nuggets last year, and I believe it was a 5 or 6 game series. Either way, I never really had any doubts that the Nuggets were going to win that series. It seemed like they were in a different class than Miami was from a talent standpoint. And, as much as there's a coaching element as well, Eric Spoelstra is the best coach in the league. At the same time, the Mike Malone was great in that series as well. But just saying, in general here, the Heat were not on the same level of the Nuggets last year. As we have a comment from Shots Below the Belt, Jimmy Buckets is Heat culture, pay the man. Who else does Miami have? Tyler Hero, Terry Rozier, maybe Bam. I would say that the Heat probably should pay Jimmy Butler, but to your point, who else do they really have? Bam being the maybe there is probably what I disagree with most there. I think that Bam does not get the credit he deserves in terms of being an all-world defender. And no, he's not necessarily a guy that you can center your offense around. But during that playoff run last year, I think that Bam did a lot of these sort of unsung things in terms of setting off-ball screens and the way that he sort of crashes the boards and all of that. Bam is a piece, but that being said, if Jimmy walks and this isn't a playoff team, I can also understand your point of what is Bam really going to provide for you at that point if you aren't necessarily a finals contending team. But I mean, yeah, absolutely. The Heat don't necessarily have a great backup plan if Jimmy Butler were to not stay with the Heat long term. Tyler Hero is, as much as we know the offense can be a lot of fun with him at times, and during that Boston series, I believe it was game 2 when he went off and showed that does he have some level of playmaking that just hasn't been scratched yet, but at the same time he was getting absolutely murdered on the defensive end, so definitely not somebody I would be comfortable handing the keys of the organization to. And ultimately here, I mean, do you think that the Heat can stay finals contenders? And in this Eastern Conference, I do think that it is open and the Heat can absolutely reestablish themselves. But I think that from a front office standpoint, they need to sort of have this conversation with Jimmy Butler. And Pat Riley, again, talked about how frustrated he was with the situation. I think he and Jimmy Butler kind of need to get on the same page, and he needs to get through to Jimmy. We need you to be available more and stop putting us, not, again, goes beyond just Jimmy Butler, but this team cannot continue to bank on getting some type of Cinderella run as a 7 or 8 seed. There needs to be more of a commitment to the regular season and having success there to put together an easier path. Listen, the Celtics are in the NBA Finals and nobody is giving them any credit because of their postseason run. But at the same time, Celtics are never going to complain with that. And the Heat would be the same way. As much as it's awesome that they make this run towards, the Cinderella run last year as the 8th seed. It's a really fun story, but at the same time, I just don't think it's sustainable as shots below the belt. Perhaps a load management to maintain Jimmy's health. I mean, I do think that that's part of the issue as well. I understand you want to maintain Jimmy's health because without him in the playoffs, the Heat aren't going to be able to compete. Is just a fact. But that being said as well, the reason why, and not the reason why, it was a freak injury that happened, but Jimmy Butler got hurt in an extra game, a play-in tournament game that, if you want to sort of dive into the way that the NBA views it, and I think that they need to change it to actual postseason, but all of the stats from these play-in tournament games just go into a void in space. They aren't counted anywhere. That is the type of game that Jimmy Butler got hurt in because this Heat team underachieved during the regular season. So I think it's bringing back Jimmy Butler, and it's trying to figure out some other sort of supplemental move, I feel like, as well during this offseason to, again, try and get to a point where they aren't having to work their way through the play-in tournament, because I've referenced it before. As much as, again, fun Cinderella run, the fact that they were able to make the finals last year, they were down late in the fourth quarter to the Chicago Bulls, and that was sort of the beginning of Jimmy Butler putting together this run. But shots fall differently. If the Chicago Bulls got hot down that stretch as well, they don't even make the playoffs, and the legacy of Jimmy Butler is just very different. So, I like Jimmy a lot. You have to, really appreciate the story, his backstory, and the way that he has gotten to this point in his career, in his life. It is all extremely motivational, but something does need to, and again, I don't know if it's from a Heat organizational standpoint of understanding maybe this is what Jimmy Butler is, of playing, average 55 games a year, maybe, 57 is probably a little bit more accurate, but the team, again, needs to find a way to not be a perennial play-in tournament team, because if that is the case, Giannis doesn't get hurt, they probably, another situation where they probably don't make the finals last year either. But again, let me know in the comments section. I do think that this is a pretty layered conversation and is definitely a storyline that we are going to continue to talk about through the offseason. But we have to take our next break here, and when we come back on the other side, want to run through the Game 4 matchup last night between the Edmonton Oilers and the Dallas Stars. So stick with us, and we will be right back after this quick break.